Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment, another episode of the GoMobi.work coaching series. Each week, we're bringing you a topic in performance development that you can use with your team to help them do their best work. So this week, we have a really exciting topic planned for you. It's pretty funny, as we were thinking about this talk and this workshop for you, our thinking evolved a little bit, and that is thanks to my co-founder here, Zoltan. But to introduce myself very quickly, my name is Wade Bruffy, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of GoMobi.work. And thanks to my brilliant co-founder here, we are going to have an awesome session today.
Yes. Welcome, everybody. I'm Zoltan Sarda. I am the Chief Coaching Officer for GoMobi. And welcome again. This is one of our favorite topics. And actually, this kind of theory we're going to share with you today, I ran across it back in somewhere in the 90s, and it sort of has stuck with me in a different ways, and it kind of came up in this conversation with Wade about thinking about today's session. So hope it's valuable for you too.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to share this with everyone. And we want to just say, if you have questions for us about this topic, send us a message because we're happy to discuss it. We also would invite you to join these sessions anytime you want. So we are having them at the same time every week. So if there is a time that works well for you, just let us know and we'd be delighted to have you here with us. So without further ado, today we're going to be talking about organizational learning. And so the topic for this week, which we had planned, was really, we wanted to highlight some of the very effective practices of leading organizations. And one of the things that effective organizations do really well, we want to share some ways that they think about this, is that they always are learning and they are making sure that there are systems in place to facilitate this learning. And we're not even really talking too much about here what kind of skills are we developing. We talk a lot about that. If you want to learn more about skills, go back and look at our talk on deliberate practice. That's a really great one. But what we're talking about here is becoming a company that we do what we say we do. And before we jumped on here, Zoltan and I were talking a little bit about that on the personal level and how important that is. So we're going to talk a little bit about it at the organizational level today.
Yeah. So go ahead, Wade.
I was going to say, we just wanted to paint the picture here of if you've ever been in an organization where you experience what we lovingly call WTF syndrome, where it seems like we're trying to do something and what we say we're trying to do isn't lining up with what's actually happening. And so even though the person that's leading the meeting maybe is saying, we want to get all this stuff done, it's not backed up with actions. So maybe we're noticing that in our meetings and our teamwork. Maybe we're saying that our company has one set of values, but in reality, maybe people really aren't that open to feedback in this organization. And that's one of our values, be open. Maybe, but except in a performance review, then it's just, you got to do that another time. And maybe even in the proposed goals of your organization as well, and versus what you actually are working towards every day. So these are some really common things that pop up as challenges, and we want to talk about ways to address those in your team today. So there is the way we talk about what we think we should do is there's this theory, and this is from Argyris and Schon. In, like Sultan said, it's a bit of an older piece of work, but it's very relevant even today, and it's something that we don't talk about enough. So the espoused theory of action, which is, as they describe, this is what we say, this is what we give our allegiance to, this is what we say we do. This is the vision that we're painting for people, that we're projecting to the world. This is our nice polished image that we want people to see. And we also have an enacted theory of action. And that you can think of the enacted theory as the theory in action. So this is really what's happening. And it doesn't always line up with the espoused theory of action. So that's the kind of interesting discrepancy here. And what we're reading from this paper is that the theory that actually governs action is his or her theory in use, which may or may not be compatible with the espoused publicly stated theory. Furthermore, it may or may not be aware of the incompatibility of the two theories. So this is something that is a really big challenge, right? We see this in organizations all the time. It's the subject of research. And I think what really ultimately leads to the WTF syndrome is when we see these two things clashing. It becomes really, really hard. And that leads you to say WTF.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really that sort of not paying attention to that. Because really what Argyris and Schon were saying is that, paying attention to the difference. So there's always going to be a difference between what we say we do and what we do. So what we say we do is the ideal. And it's really hard to be 100% lined up. It's probably almost impossible to be 100% lined up with that ideal. So paying attention to what the difference is between those and acknowledging that there's going to be a difference. It could be, what actually happens is not as good as what we are, expecting, or it could be better, so it's like that question, why was that better this time? And paying attention to it, whether it's a positive difference or whether it's a negative difference. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is like what keeps us from looking at that difference. And Argyris and Schon also talked about this idea of organizational defense routines. So it's having ways of behaving and systems at work within an organization that protects it from embarrassment or threat. I would also add to it that it protects us from looking at things we don't know how to fix, right? So if we're not sure how to fix something, we're going to lock into it a little bit more. And the problem with that, and one of the things that Wade and I have been espousing all along, hopefully living up to it as well, is that, reflection, vulnerability, understanding, and all of that is really looking at the details of what's happening, whether on an individual level or an organizational level, is really what leads to growth. So most of the talks we've done have been about how do we put people in the position of really being open to thinking about how they're learning and how they're developing. And again, so this idea of, again, out of this work comes this idea of single loop learning versus double loop learning. And we're going to advocate here for thinking about, because this is really our approach. And so again, this whole research is often about how an organization does this learning. But Wade and our look at this in terms of how are we setting up coaching situations, it's really the organization comes down to an individual piece. So there's, the organization has sort of their things like their core values. This is what we say we do. They don't know, it's impossible to match that ideal 100% of the time. But then the individual employees have some way of thinking about what they do that's presumably aligned up with those, those core values. And there's also always a difference there. So in a coaching situation, we want to think about what is this process that's going on. So single loop learning is, it's what we do every day. So we're looking at what are the successes and failures, and then thinking about how those successes and failures can, how can we evaluate them to avoid, to have a different outcome in the future. And then what we're doing here is we're focusing on actions, decisions, and results. So we've taken some actions, we've made some decisions about how to do things. We're going to look at the results of that, and we're going to analyze those three factors. And then we think about, so what if we just change this action or change this decision, make it, revise it a little bit? How is that going to change the result? So the double loop learning goes deeper than that. It does the same thing. It looks at those actions, decisions, and results, but it also adds to that. And that is that it looks at the assumptions that we're making that went into those actions and decisions. It looks at what are the perspectives that have influenced those actions and decisions. So, why did we take that action? And then we're questioning the reasoning on that level, rather than saying, okay, so we're gonna revise this decision that we made. It could be a faulty decision, right? I mean, the reason for going into it, there could have been something in terms of our perspective or our assumption that may have influenced that decision. It could be faulty. So that question of what might have influenced that decision or action that's leading to a less than desirable result. So asking questions like, is the objective right that we're going for? Why are people not performing well on this? We've decided this is what we're going to do. We can't just say our employees are lazy or they're not good at this or whatever. Why are looking at what's keeping people from performing in line with those decisions? Thinking about how can things be reframed, restructured so we can think about them differently. And then a big piece that Wade and I talk about all the time is that we need ongoing data to really look at what are those influences on performance, and how does our perspective and slight changes in our perspective and looking at things in new ways, how can that change the performance or the outcome? And when we're talking about data, we're not talking about like annual review level data. We're talking about, if you have an O3 every 2 weeks, where's the data that is going to support both an employee's performance and think about like what's going into their decision making, what's going into their ability to perform that, whatever it is that their job is. So again, some of the things that we've talked about in our Wade and I were just talking, this is about, I think, our 13th session of this. So if you look back at some of our previous discussions, one of the things that we look at is what's the issue around clarity? If we say we do something, is everybody on the same page for what that means? We get down to a lot of, what's the interpretation? We eliminate the possibility for, I have one interpretation of this, my employee has another interpretation of this, and my boss has another interpretation. That's just not going to get us to where we need to be. One of the things that we did a whole talk on was this idea of motivation and self-determination theory. So, the idea here is, are we deciding that maybe we need to give bonuses to people to see if we can move them forward? But really, what if the problem is people have a lack of sense of competence? Then this is tied into the self-determination theory. Or what if it's actually they're feeling like they don't have autonomy, or they don't understand the purpose or the meaning of the work that they're doing? So, bonuses could be a great way to handle this, but maybe it's something else. And the third thing is this idea of attribution bias. We did a talk earlier about attributional theory and attribution bias, and that's how we explain things like other people's behaviors, how we explain our own behaviors. Are we skewed in our thinking about what is motivating people, or what's driving people, or why people are behaving in a particular way, or why do they not have a particular skill? So thinking about looking at, and this is just a few examples of what we can sort of look into. So now we're saying, so we have these policies, we have these processes, we have these decisions we've made. Do we need to change those because maybe there's a problem with self-determination theory? Maybe we're attributing things in the wrong way to provide an explanation for what's going on. Or maybe it's just not clear. Maybe we need to make it more clear. So I'll turn it back to Wade.
Yeah, and I think Zoltan, one of the things I just wanted to highlight before we jump into our example here is really that what we're looking for organizations to do when they adopt this work is to go another level deeper on what is a level of understanding of what's happening in our business, and really leveraging that to create a sense of coherence and cohesion among the team. Because when you are actually addressing these things, you're developing a better understanding of the whole, how we work together, of what our company does, and ultimately you're creating this sense of a feedback loop. Like I think the single loop is going around, but the double loop almost keeps looping over and over and over and over, because these questions, and you'll see, we're going to give you some examples in a second, that these questions are something that you never really want to stop asking. These are the effective management questions, the effective leadership questions, the effective strategy questions that you are constantly posing to your team to say, what's getting in our way? What are we not seeing? This is what great organizations do versus average organizations.
And, and I would say that's even when things are working well, because at some point things are going to change, right? So asking that question, are these still the right decisions to make? Are these still the right actions to take? And why are they the right actions, the right decisions? So I really appreciate that point, Wayne.
Yeah, awesome. So we wanted to give an example, something that we worked with a customer on recently, and that's that their leadership team was really feeling uncertain about OKRs. So one of the things that we do with our platform is we help people set and manage goals for their team. And we have worked that in goal coaching sessions, employee development sessions, as we call them in our conversations with business leaders, is that a big part of that is always centered around goals. You have something that your company is working towards. Now, how can we help this person in front of me improve so that they're more effective at achieving the goals that we've set for them as part of our business objectives? So goals, OKRs is a really popular framework. This is something that we work with all the time. So they had put together, their leadership team had put together some OKRs, and another member of the leadership team, the head of people, came to us and said, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with these OKRs because there's something not quite right about them. And she wasn't sure how to explain what the OKRs were really meaning. So what we diagnosed is that they were really unclear. And so in a single loop organization, if this were a single loop organization and we're helping them become a double loop organization, they might have just said, okay, what's wrong with these? Oh, they're unclear. Okay, well, why don't you reword them so that they're a little more clear? Now, in a double loop organization, we were encouraging them to ask, what is making these unclear? Why is this actually not something that we're not getting? And then asking how might we make them clearer, and then what can we do in the future to make sure that we're setting clear OKRs. So what we determined is that they needed to make them more specific, they needed to be broken out, and they needed further descriptions. And we talked a little bit in a previous week, I think it was our deliberate practice week also, where we talked about how real effective OKR setting involves describing the behaviors that are going to go into completing the OKR. So if one of your key results is 100 meetings for the year for our software demo, what are the kinds of things that people setting OKRs, people that are setting their goals underneath that, they need to be able to understand, maybe not even going a little bit beyond, hey, well, we need to be making 1,000 cold calls if we want to make 100 demos, and that would be really good. But what we need to actually discuss with people as part of skill development and employee development, person sitting in front of us, is, okay, well then what does it look like to make a really effective cold call? So a lot of those coaching ideas, a lot of that development ideas are things that maybe we think about doing in an informal way, but to Zoltan's point earlier, gathering data on all these things brings it to a whole new level. You can understand where people are struggling, where people are succeeding, who's doing well. Like if there's a particular person in your organization that's a really good mentor, maybe you can start to quantify that and ask them a double loop question. What is enabling you to get people to do really well? What is it that about your approach that's working for people? So we wanted to we worked with this customer on this, and ultimately they felt that their OKRs became a lot clearer, and hopefully their employees feel that way too.
And the thing that was striking to me in that conversation was the person who's like the lead professional developer in the organization. She's like, I don't even want to open this because it's like I'm procrastinating on it because I'm just confused, So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like you're not using it, so like why, and then it opened up that conversation. It's like, okay, OKR is a good thing, but we need to think about why are people not using them as they should be.
Awesome. So we always include an exercise in these sessions for you, and so we wanted to give you some examples of what a single loop question versus a double loop question would look like. And so just to highlight a few of these, and what our exercise for you today is to take this back to your next meeting with your team and ask some of these double loop questions with people. And so we've actually done this side by side to a little bit compare and contrast what these questions look like. So a single loop question might ask, what happened? And that would be good to understand what happened, right? That's helpful information. There's nothing wrong with asking what happened. That might be the first step in the process. But a double loop question would be, what might prevent us from achieving the ideal outcome next time? What kinds of things are going to get in our way? This is a higher level of consideration, a higher level of questioning, so that we're going to actually understand how to unblock ourselves before we even get started. And this is going to help us with our learning a lot. So you might also ask, how can we get more business, as a single loop question? How many times have you heard that question in your professional career? I think I've heard it probably 100. I've probably asked that question about 100 times, 1,000 times. So yeah, 100 times in the past month. And it's not a bad question. So what we're asking, a better way of asking that question is to say, why aren't people buying from us? What's stopping people? What's the friction in our process? Why aren't people lining up out our door to buy our thing? What's happening? That's a double loop question, because you're going to understand what are the blockers more so than what are the other little activities or tactics or things that we can take on to try to get more business.
Yeah, and I think the one above it that goes great with that one is, what kept us from seeing this? That's like,
yeah.
So that question of why aren't people buying this from us, but why didn't we see it? I think that's a really interesting set of questions there.
Yeah, I love it. And one that we added recently, just before we jumped on here, was, are these questions that we're asking the right questions to ask? So what are we not seeing, I think, is ultimately, does that come down to? And it's really this careful consideration of everything. I think there's a great book by a hedge fund manager, Ray Dalio, where he talks about needing to know what the unknown unknowns are in investments. And it's a really powerful perspective from somebody who's been exceptionally successful as a predictor of markets, and constantly trying to challenge his what are these the right questions? Find me somebody who actually disagrees with me. I want to talk to them because I want to know why they disagree with me. And I hope they're really smart, because I want to be, honestly, I'm ready to be convinced if I am wrong, but I don't think I am. So bring me the smartest person you can find that thinks something different. So really interesting double loop learning.
And I love your that idea that you're saying, so the single loop questions are important questions still.
Definitely.
We're still asking those questions. It's just, but then we're going to ask, so what's behind these things that we're exploring in the single loop? I think that's a really, you can't get to the double loop unless you ask the single loop as well.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of the double loop too is that a lot of this, like you maybe even just get to the answer to the single loop by asking the double loop. Yeah.
And I think one of the things here that if you're asking these kind of double loop questions, even if you don't have an answer, like when we talk about that WTF syndrome, it's usually because you leave someplace and it's like, there should have been some kind of decision. There could have been some kind of answer. There should have been something there, right? But this is like, you don't have to have the answer right now, but just because we're asking the question, people are like, oh, okay, so it's going in a direction, it's going in a direction that we can continue to explore, and we will find some kind of an answer to it. But it's much more satisfying than just do the same thing different. You do the same thing harder next time is kind of, and don't really look at why it's not working.
Yep. All right, everyone. Well, this is what we have for you today. And so we hope this was really, really helpful for you. We hope you can use these questions, because these are the kinds of things that are going to help you really jump up to a new level of leadership and developing your team. Because these are the kinds of questions that really engender reflection. These are the kinds of questions that you need to be asking in order to really help somebody grow, to help somebody understand what's actually blocking me, instead of just trying to band-aid over stuff and maybe make it go away for the time being, but it's a much more stressful process. But this is a more proactive approach, and it becomes really, really effective. And people who are really, really successful do this very, very well.
Yeah. And I think if you find interest in this, as Wade mentioned, we have lots of other examples online here, and we've done a talk on OKRs and how do you establish those. We've done a talk on motivation theory, all those pieces that we talked about today. So if you want more detail on those, go back and take a look.
Yep. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for being here. We'll be back next week with another topic in leadership and performance development. And until then, drop us a line if you need anything. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, be well.